Thank you so much for listening. This talk today will be about inflammation, the endocannabinoid system, and apitherapy and CBD. And I wish I had more time to really unpack some of these ideas because they're big, big ideas, and we only have a little bit of time. So if you'd like to dig a little deeper, feel free to email me directly if you want any peer-reviewed literature on any of these topics. I also have written on much of this, as well as take a look at some of the podcasts and videos that I've done. My hope is that you'll have a basic understanding about why the endocannabinoid system offers such a wide, broad base of support through so many biologic systems. And why apitherapy and CBD can affect positively so many different parts of the body in comparison to single molecule drugs, which are usually typically targeting only one single biochemical pathway. What are some of the basics of the endocannabinoid system? Well, this system is the largest cell receptor system in the human body. It's a 600 million year old receptor system. It is present in all animals, with a possible exception of insects. And the endocannabinoid system consists of endocannabinoid molecules that our body makes, as well as the receptors that they land on, and endocannabinoid degrading enzymes. The endocannabinoid system functions as a self-regulating adaptation and harm reduction system. And as I mentioned, it influences many physiologic processes. I refer to it as kind of like the internet of our body. It's stimulated by cannabis as well as other plants, including echinacea and many others. And ECS functioning can be improved with many of the things we consider healthy. That would include exercise, good healthy diet, probiotics, acupuncture, chiropractic manipulation. I think apitherapy, when we look into it, we're going to find a lot of information about that, and certainly also CBD. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into the endocannabinoid system. As I mentioned, it's a dynamic high-density receptor system, meaning there are a huge number of receptors, and the receptor populations are fluctuating wildly because it is a sentinel system. It is a listening and reaction system. So the receptors are not stable. They're constantly being upregulated and downregulated. It developed around 600 million years ago, when at that time, early life was only in the oceans. There was no land on our planet at that time. And single cells were, from an evolutionary perspective, starting to combine together. And this is the period of time where the first development of the first multicellular organisms with bodies started to come to fruition and to life on the planet. The ECS, therefore, at this time, where single cells were combining to form multicellular organisms, helped solve some of the problems that early life needed to tackle in order to have bodies. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that. What are the problems that a body has that single-celled organism don't have? Well, single cells don't need to have an embryologic template, and the endocannabinoid system is intimately involved in all aspects of embryologic development, from the sperm and the egg fertilizing through implantation into the uterus, as well as the development of stem cells and the differentiation of cellular processes in the body. Also, organisms with body need to get food sources, glucose, sugar, and other molecules from the source of from the food source to the parts of the body that don't have access to them. So feeding an energy balance is very important for the endocannabinoid system, and the ECS is involved in nearly all aspects of those particular processes. Also, organisms with body have, not only do they have cells, but they have tissues and organs and organ systems. And tissues need to be able to tell, the body needs to be able to tell when tissues become injured. When tissues become injured, there needs to be a communication process that begins. And so inflammation is actually healthy in its early phase. That's the beginning of the tissue repair process. So it's chronic inflammation that is our enemy, not so much acute inflammation. Also, once the tissue damage has been detected, the body needs to organize and mobilize resources to heal and repair the organism. So tissue protection and repair processes are fundamental also to what the endocannabinoid system does. And another area is for tissues dealing with hypoxia, low oxygen. And we have some really cool studies on CBD and neuroprotection with the endocannabinoid system, specifically in stroke and where the neural tissue has an oxygen deprivation, really fascinating protective qualities, as well as cardiovascular studies. So email me if you would like some of those resources, or Google my name, and I've got papers on those as well that I've written. When cells started to get together and cooperate to form bodies evolutionarily, the first tissue that was formed was connective tissue. Connective tissue can sometimes be called interstitium, interstitium or connective tissue, we now know in modern biology that is actually considered a proper organ system in and of itself, similar to the cardiovascular system or the integumentary system or the nervous system. And it is largely a water-based system. You can see from some of these slides that there are cellular components, and the artist's rendition has clear areas. Those are the water-filled compartments of the body. A lot of the water in our bodies is outside of our cells and not inside. There is water inside of our cells, but there's a whole oceanic environment outside of our cells. For example, plasma in our blood is connective tissue. And the synapse between nerve cells where the nerve conduction takes place, that's also connective tissue. And it's all interconnected, similar to how the oceans and the streams and the rivers are all connected. One of the reasons that our blood tastes salty is because biologically, we've literally brought the ocean inside of us. And that oceanic environment bathes our cells from day to day in a continual process. So the connective tissue is largely a water-based system, and it's interconnected. I call it, as I said, the internet of the body. If you look at the picture here with the bricks and the mortar, the bricks could represent the cells and the mortar, the connective tissue. And you can see that there's a continuous array of canals of connectivity with the mortar. The same is true in our body. Nearly every cell in our entire body is bathed at least partially by some aspect of this connective tissue. And if we look embryologically at what's going on in the development of connective tissue embryologically, the ECS is required for the sperm and the egg to meet. If we block the endocannabinoid system, you don't get a fertilization of the sperm and the egg. So after the egg has been fertilized, this process of cell division begins, and we go from one single cell to 2 to 4. And if you look here early in this slide, you will see that in this area where there are 4 simple cells, the beginning of this connective tissue of this interface where cells in a body will start to communicate. Again, that white aspect could correlate to the mortar and the red to the bricks. Additionally, as we get into pathology, the tumor microenvironment of cancer also is involved, entirely consists of connective tissue and varying cells. So cancer cells are also in direct contact with interstitium, and a lot of our targeted therapies are addressing the tumor microenvironment. We'll have more to say about this in another talk with this conference. So how do we stabilize networks, biologic networks that are in constant flux? Well, we need things to keep biology within certain set parameters. So think of how a thermostat keeps our temperature of our homes within a certain range. If it gets too hot, the air conditioning kicks on. If it gets too cool, the heat turns on. And we have this oscillation of temperature that maintains a satisfactory level. Same thing happens with the endocannabinoid system. In fact, every single biological oscillator that we have looked at today, without exception, involves this endocannabinoid system. So the question begins, how do we stabilize biologic networks? Something you should Google is network pharmacology. They're really copying how plants and natural medicines work, but it's really cool because now it's got a pharmacologic bent, and everybody sees it as being scientific. And the current task in cutting edge research is how to address some of our more challenging, complex chronic diseases, such as neurodegenerative diseases, multiple sclerosis, or cancer, where there are multifactorial processes involved in the illness. So in order to address multi-pronged pathological processes that have many different elements, we need to have a pharmacology that is also dynamic and addresses multiple biochemical pathways at the same time. And this is this network idea that I'm talking about. And because plant medicines, including cannabis and CBD, as well as apitherapy and bee venom, which contains and hits multiple chemical pathways, we are able to develop, affect physiology using hitting multiple pathways. And as a result of utilizing multiple a therapy that addresses multiple biochemical pathways, we can lower the dose, hence lowering toxicity and broadening effectiveness. I would love to have more to say on this, but as I said, our time is very limited. So my hypothesis is that CBD and bee venom do work to stabilize these body-wide networks, thus contributing to robust health. I think there's a large body of evidence to support this. Not only apitherapy and cannabis, but a whole host of other complementary and therapeutic activities that we consider healthy stabilize our endocannabinoid system. I mentioned exercise is stabilizing the system, acupuncture, chiropractic, essential fatty acids, omega-3s, probiotics. All of these are acting as network stabilizers. So they may not be addressing pathology directly, but they can all be supportive of the entire network. It's actually changing the way, on the cutting edge, the way we think about what disease is and what health is. So the endocannabinoid system gives us a new way of thinking about natural medicine, such as cannabis or apitherapy, all of which contain these multiple chemical constituents and are not just simply hitting a single biochemical pathway. And in addition to the molecules in the single therapies affecting multiple pathways and creating network stability, we can have different therapeutic modalities such as diet plus exercise plus apitherapy plus potentially cannabinoid therapy, all contributing, all stabilizing, all synergizing, and all supporting. And before I move on further, I do want to just take a little segue and say not only is CBD good for humans, but also is very good for bees. And our bees are sick, whether it be from pollution or viruses, they need our help. And when bees are able to pollinate hemp crops, CBD, or cannabis crops, it actually helps their immune systems. And I presented this paper at last year's conference and have since seen a large number of popular articles written on this very topic. Another thing I want to address is the idea of cannabis being bad for brains. We have a lot of studies showing that the THC, the psychedelic part of cannabis, may not be so good for developing brains, youthful brains, childhood brains, and I absolutely agree that that's something we need to take a look at. But if we think about the aging brain, it's a whole different story. Cannabis and the endocannabinoid system dramatically, the research shows, are very, very helpful, not only for developing brains, but also for aging and elderly populations. This particular study, investigators noted that marked improvement in the elderly patient's symptoms, including reduced agitation. And also they reported these patients were all on a lot of different medications, and they did not see significant drug interactions with the cannabis. So remember that cannabis can not only be good for elderly nervous systems, it can also be very supportive for quality of life. This next study is a randomized controlled trial. And the patients that received cannabis, again, elderly patients, had a significantly greater reduction in their sleep disturbances, and also in not only their sleep disturbances, but also with aggravation and aggression. So the patients slept better, they were more personable, and for staff and other folks in the care centers, much more agreeable and easy to get along with. Aging is both, so I do want to talk about aging, and aging is both inside and outside of our body. We typically think of skin as the external aspect of beauty, and Dr. Bridget Goodwin will be talking and addressing skin beautification with apitherapy. Could CBD help maintain beautiful, healthy skin? I think there's some evidence for that. CBD markedly alleviates skin fibrosis, which is a hardening of the skin. This can be in chronic diseases like scleroderma, but it also can occur as we age. The skin loses some of its flexibility and pliability. Another pretty cool study on CBD and fibroblasts, which are the cells that make collagen everywhere in our body, but in our skin is particularly important for wrinkles. Remember that the collagen is part of the connective tissue matrix, so that CBD actually has, at least in this particular study, I'm going to peek real quick here, fascial reorganizational capacity is how they say it. Fascia is another word for connective tissue, as is interstitium. Okay, so, but as I said, aging is more than skin deep. And what exactly is aging biologically? Well, there's something called the free radical theory of aging. Our bodies are rusting as we sit here right now. It's sad to say, really, it is. Or think of it, instead of rust, which is kind of an inanimate object, think of an apple. You take a bite of an apple, put it on the table, it starts to turn brown. Those are the reactive oxygen species interacting with the apple cells, and we get this oxidation where electrons are being ripped off of the cell membranes, causes this rusting or this browning of the apple. And the balance between the generation of toxic metabolic byproducts, including these reactive oxygen species, and their clearance and repair is part of what is involved in the aging process. So we can turn down the damage, and we can also turn up the repair processes. CBD does both of those. I'm not as much of an expert on apitherapy, but from what I have seen, CBD reduces on the harm side as well. And from some brief conversations I've had with experts who will be presenting here in the conference, works on both sides. But again, I'm more on the plant side of this as far as my experience goes. We have these evolutionarily conserved homeostasis mechanisms. One of those are our DNA repair molecules. We actually have DNA repair molecules that go by, they check our DNA. If the DNA has been hit by one of these oxidants or reactive oxygen species, a repair process will happen. Unfortunately, though, sometimes the DNA that gets hit with these reactive oxygen species is also the same DNA that codes for those very same DNA repair enzymes. So the code for the repair processes gets hit, and then we get these repair molecules that aren't as good as they used to be. And so that as the continuous process of aging happens, we get a slow, continual degradation in the quality of our DNA that codes for these repair enzymes and these repair processes. So it creates a vicious cycle over time that we know of as aging. And for example, it's very clear for anyone who's in our 50s, 60s or beyond that we do not repair as well as we used to. Part of this comes from this oxidation or this reactive oxygen species attacking our body's cell membranes. Also, neural inflammation definitely contributes to aging from the mental perspective. It also can contribute to depression and increased incidence of neurodegenerative diseases, including autoimmune diseases like MS, Parkinson's, which is not necessarily, it's not an autoimmune disease, but is a disease of aging. I believe that due to their anti-inflammatory effects, we know that apitherapy and CBD are reducing the amount of reactive oxygen species in our body, in our tissues, and in our cells. They do this both by reducing inflammation and also as acting as antioxidant molecules, so working on both sides of the application. They share, both CBD and apitherapy share common biochemical pathways, including phospholipase A2 cascade, which feeds into the cyclooxygenase pathway. We've heard of COX inhibitors as anti-inflammatories, nuclear factor kappa B, which is a nuclear receptor, TNF alpha, gamma interferon, interleukin 6, and others. And when we reduce inflammation, as I said, this reduces reactive oxygen species, thus slows the resting of our body. The Egyptians said a long time ago that the Egyptians love to combine bee therapy products with cannabis products. I think there are a few experts on this in our conference here, so you might want to ask them about that if you have the opportunity. And it's not only the anti-inflammatory aspects that can be effective. There are also applications for neurodegenerative diseases, MS, and a big part of the cancer and the tumor microenvironment involves these reactive oxygen species. So cancer prevention on one hand and anti-cancer properties on the other, both from CBD and THC, all helping to stabilize this connective tissue network that the endocannabinoid system runs on to a very large degree. So where do the reactive oxygen species attack our cells? Right on the cell membrane connective tissue interface. And so those reactive oxygen species, something called lipid peroxidation, really can wreak havoc on our cell membranes. And that is right on the border where the connective tissue is in direct contact. The seawater is in direct contact and bathing all of the cells of our body. So I do believe firmly that antioxidants and anti-inflammatory protection, both from apitherapy and cannabinoids, can slow this damage and slow and potentially stop some of the rusting of our tissues. This was a big topic. I took as much time as I could. I really appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. Feel free to contact me offline. I'm happy to meet if you're a professional. Let's have a talk. And thank you so much for being here.